like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun. To dream.
Let's listen to Pavarotti.
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti. I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And folks, let me tell you, old Pavarotti, he has been busy today focusing on the Idaho 4 case. And I have dug into some things and I've uncovered some things, and it is just blowing my mind, really. So I got you two videos coming. This is going to be the first one. The second one, I'm going to blow the lid off of what the defense is trying to do in that open hearing, and it is amazing. But before I get into that, I mean, I've got to help people think this through, okay? Because you've got to really think on another level when you're contemplating the things that we're talking about now in this upcoming hearing, and how important it is for it to be open to the public, especially the IGG portion. And the reason it is so important is because I believe that the effect that was desired in the beginning, after they arrested Bryan Kohbeger and this story was leaked, I believe the effects of that leak are going to start having implications in the case today. And I already see it. Whenever I look around at things, I have a very good ability to gauge, the conversations that are going on and the direction that they're taking. You see, right now, the conversations, even amongst the people who have Bryan Kohbeger is likely innocent, the conversations are starting to shift from Bryan Kohbeger is innocent to the state really screwed up by invading our privacy and using methods that they weren't supposed to use in order to catch Bryan Kohbeger. You see, that is very dangerous at this stage of the game. And let me explain why. Because when you go into that, you're going into it with the perspective of that is Bryan Kohbeger's DNA on the knife sheath, okay? That is a very dangerous proposition. At this point in time, I mean, we should know unequivocally that that is not Bryan Kohbeger's DNA on the knife sheath. I mean, if you think about it, if the prosecution was correct, and that is Bryan Kohbeger's car circling that neighborhood, and in tomorrow night's video, I'm going to prove exactly what I'm saying right here. But if that was his car circling that neighborhood, it was last seen on the Linda Lane camera circling the Linda Lane apartments at 4:07. I mean, you're talking about it's 4:12, 4:13 before he could actually make it into that house. And then it's 4:18 for him to leave the house, get to his car, and be able to pull away to be caught on the camera. So, I mean, you're talking about 5 minutes in that house. But even more important than that, if you follow the timeline that people want to put together, that Xana was likely awakened on her TikTok at 4:12, I mean, you're talking about he would have to go in and be in Xana's room, because that's where Dylan saying she heard Xana crying and a man say, "It's okay, I'm here to help you." By the time he could have gotten in the house, he could have only been in Xana's room. That leaves zero time. And they said, think about it. After he leaves Xana's room, that's when Dylan opens her door and he sees the guy walking towards her. And he walks past her and towards the back door. That means after Xana and Ethan, he didn't go upstairs. I mean, that all but verifies that if you believe everything that's said into that point. So looking at it just from a straight fact-based scenario with the facts that the prosecution is putting forward, this is the prosecution story. Based on what the prosecution has stated in the PCA, the two upstairs were already unalived at this point because the assailant comes out of Xana and Ethan's room and then walks out. If that vehicle is still driving around at 4:07, it can't park and even get into the home until 4:12 or 4:13. You're already in to the time frame where Dylan's hearing Xana cry and somebody say, "I'm here to help you." At that point, that person could not go upstairs and leave a knife sheath. So if the prosecution's determination that that is Kohbeger driving around in that car, then what I just said to you proves that that isn't Kohbeger's knife sheath, And that's not his DNA on the knife sheath. You've got to understand that part first. Also, though, I do believe firmly that that knife sheath was planted. I believe that knife sheath was planted either one of two ways. And I'm not going to talk about the first way in this video, but the second way I believe it was planted was the fact that Officer Gundy was one of the first on the scene, video evidence. He has a history with the Stickergate incident of doing dishonest things, and he's Tyson Farley's first cousin's husband. I think that is where if a knife sheath was planted, it was planted. That's my number one place. But regardless of that, it is impossible. You've got to think, it is impossible to plant somebody's touch DNA on a knife sheath. So when you get all of that down in your mind, even if the knife sheath was planted, touch DNA was not planted of Bryan Kohbeger's on that knife sheath. It's impossible. That is impossible. So that leads only to one conclusion, that is not Kohbeger's DNA on the knife sheath. Therefore, an investigative genetic genealogy search could not have led to Bryan Kohbeger. It's impossible. If that genetic genealogy search led to Bryan Kohbeger or a plethora of his cousins that they found in a 23andMe database, that would mean that Bryan Kohbeger would have had to touch that knife sheath, which we know he did not. So that should lead you to the last only possible conclusion. It's not his DNA on the knife sheath, so what is going on with the IgG? In the next video, I'm going to show you, and I'm going to show you unequivocally with the court hearing and with other facts, I'm going to show you unequivocally what the defense has the ability to do in that hearing. They can wipe out the IgG and the DNA in one fell swoop, and it will be very easy for them to do it. And I'm going to show you where they would have the information to do it. It's going to blow your mind, I promise you. But focusing on the propaganda in this one, because the propaganda has been big since this thing started. You see, the FBI knows that their family tree was bogus. They did it in reverse. And they also know if there was a mistake in that family tree for some reason and it was uncovered, well, then they're going to look really, really bad in this case. But they also know the real nexus to Bryan Kohbeger, and they know it wasn't the IgG. They also know that this case would have been scrutinized very heavily. So for them to be able to explain, especially after reading that PCA, several of us was able to read the PCA and determine the fact that they didn't find Kohbeger with the WSU cops until the 20th of December, because it was clear as day in the PCA. Then when they put Payne on the stand and verified it, that was a foregone conclusion. I believe the FBI would have anticipated that. They probably read that PCA. So what they had to do was leak. They had to leak the information about the IgG. They had to leak it because they needed it out there in the public, because when people started scrutinizing that PCA, they knew they would figure it out. So their saving grace, other than the confidential informant, would be the IgG. Now, how did they go about leaking the information? What was that article that we all read a long time ago? I read it to you in a video, probably 8 or 9 months ago. But I'm going to touch on it again in this video because the defense cited it in their motion to unseal the IgG hearing. And then I'm going to give you some information on that magazine that information was leaked into that will absolutely freak you out. I assure you. Let's get right into it. Okay, so in the footnote here of the defense's motion to unseal the IgG hearing, you'll see that they put aspects of the IgG investigation in this case have already been leaked. Heather Tal Murphy's How the Police Actually Cracked the Idaho Killings Case, Slate Magazine, January 10th, 2023. This is in that motion. Now, why did they put it in the motion? You see, this defense team, it's sharp. And their investigators, they may be even sharper. Why would they put that footnote in this motion to unseal this hearing? Well, they're letting them know that this information has already been put out there, and it's been put out there by the law enforcement side, not the defense side. But you got to ask yourself, because in this next video, I'm going to show you some of this hearing where everybody clearly agrees, the judge especially, that the IGG will never be used at trial. The IGG, the prosecution swears to the judge says this, the prosecution swears they didn't use the IGG to obtain any of the warrants. So if it's not going to be used in trial and it's not going to be used to obtain the warrants, why was it necessary for it to be leaked to the public? And it's clear as day, and that's what Ann Taylor is showing in that footnote. This was a purposeful leak to the public so that once people figured out that the PCA didn't make any sense, they would have a fallback on their nexus to Kohbeger that was not the real nexus to Kohbeger. And I'll show you why here in a minute. But we mainly have to look at that article, and then we have to look at who that article was by. And why was it by that particular magazine? And what is up with that magazine? Let me show you. Okay, you can see how police actually cracked the Idaho killings case. And this is investigators use forensic genealogy to zero in on suspect Bryan Kohbeger, but they aren't saying so. And this is by Heather Towle Murphy, January 10th, 2023. But they aren't saying so. Well, it sounds to me like they're saying so because they're writing this article on January 10th, 5 days after arresting Kohbeger. And this is Slate Magazine, right? This isn't a local magazine. This is Slate. And I'm going to tell you about Slate here in just a minute. But it starts out with information about the case, and then it goes in and it mentions, the affidavit, probable cause, that on November 29th, they located the Elantra at WSU. And even in this article, they knew all that was BS. But it was right here. It would be another month before they arrested Kohbeger. All the while, investigators would keep pleading for more tips about Elantras. But according to a law enforcement source familiar with the investigation, with whom I spoke, a key reason police focused on Kohbeger as the likely suspect has to do with something that's never mentioned in the 18-page affidavit: forensic genealogy. It was only after the investigators utilized a technique relying on genealogy databases to determine whose DNA left on the tan leather knife sheath that police requested a search warrant for Kohbeger's phone records. According to this source, up until that point, late December, he hadn't stood out amongst the other Elantra owners, the source said, something that is reinforced by a close informed reading of the affidavit. So even they could reinforce it with a close informed reading of the affidavit. So you know that the FBI knew that people would be able to do this. And then it gets into all the stuff about the arrest. And it says, after the arrest, the judge in Idaho issued a gag order prohibiting anyone involved in the case from speaking about it in order to encourage a fair trial. The order also appeared, wait a minute. Well, it sounds to me like that gag order didn't work because this law enforcement source familiar with the investigation sure broke that gag order and sure has greatly affected this fair trial that they were encouraging for Kohbeger to have. So why would they do that? That's what we got to ask ourselves always. Why would this law enforcement source familiar with the investigation expose all of this information just 5 days after they arrested Bryan Kohbeger? And let me tell you, as they go through everything in this article about the DNA on the knife sheath and how they used genetic genealogy and how they really didn't know who Kohbeger was until December the 19th, they are actually creating the argument that they want people to have down the road. Right here, you'll even see the GED match and the family tree DNA, and then they create the argument right here for 23andMe and Ancestry.com and not having access. So why would they leak all of this on January 10th, 2023, so early in the case? And who is this Slate Magazine that has divulged all this confidential information and created this media stir from the beginning? Let me show you. The Slate Magazine is not a local magazine. It is a magazine that's based in New York City with an additional office in Washington, D.C. Slate, which is updated throughout the day, covers politics, arts, and culture, sports, and news. But because of its locations in New York City and Washington, D.C., where the FBI main offices happen to reside, you can bet that Slate Magazine is nothing more than a propaganda arm of that three-letter agency and possibly more. And let me tell you, as I've dug in deeper to Slate Magazine, I was searching for verifiable information that Slate Magazine was a propaganda arm of the FBI, and I came across a really interesting article, and it's going to blow your mind. So looking for information related to Slate Magazine being a propaganda arm of the three-letter agencies, I came across this exhibit filed in a court case in January 16th of 2014, and it's exhibit number 10, and it's interesting because the exhibit, Stingray FOIA, DOJ accused of illegally withholding info on clandestine cell phone surveillance. All right, so this was a case brought against the Department of Justice for withholding info on clandestine cell phone surveillance. And it's going to get into the Stingray. But the article that it's citing is future tense, A New America, Slate Magazine. Okay, this is an article by Slate Magazine. And the article accuses DOJ accused of illegally withholding info on clandestine cell phone surveillance tool. Now, why would Slate, if they're a propaganda arm of the three-letter agencies, print an article talking about the illegal use by the DOJ? Well, I'll tell you, because I'm not going to read the entire article, but at the very end it says, but the judge ruled that the use of Stingray to track down the suspect who was accused of fraud and identity theft did not constitute a severe intrusion and ultimately held that no Fourth Amendment violation occurred because they wanted to promote the fact that the judge ruled in their favor. You see, this magazine is nothing more than a DOJ, FBI, probably CIA, and all the others. This is their tool to get propaganda out in advance to try to sway public opinion. That's exactly what it is. But listen to this. In the aftermath of recent revelations about secret NSA, National Security Agency surveillance programs, the Justice Department is coming under renewed pressure to release information about a controversial cell phone tracking device. In a new Freedom of Information Act lawsuit filed in California earlier this month, the DOJ is accused of illegally withholding a trove of records related to clandestine tool known as the Stingray. How many times have we heard about Stingray in this thing? The Stingray is a portable transceiver that sends out a signal that tricks all cell phones within a targeted area into hopping onto a fake network. The spy device, sometimes also described as an IMSI catcher or a digital analyzer, is used by law enforcement agencies to covertly track down suspects. The FBI claims that it uses the device only to monitor the location of individuals and not to eavesdrop on text messages and phone calls. However, every time Stingrays are used, they inadvertently collect identifying data from all phones within a targeted radius. Does that sound a lot like the the phone dump that we keep hearing about, including those belonging to innocent bystanders, which is why civil liberties groups allege that they disproportionately violate privacy. Following the leak of NSA documents showing the extent of the agency's surveillance programs, the ACLU's Northern California branch filed a lawsuit in an attempt to get the DOJ to turn over information about the use of highly intrusive and indiscriminate stingray tool. In the complaint, the ACLU argues that concern prompted by the NSA stories illustrates that there is a great urgency to inform the public about any and all forms of dragnet electronic surveillance by the government. The group says that it filed a FOIA request for the Stingray documents back in April, but has not yet received any documents in response. It further accuses DOJ of illegal withholding of government documents and is asking that the court order the prompt, release the files, or declare the non-disclosure unlawful. So, again, at the end, in May, however, the FBI won a highly publicized battle against privacy advocates in U.S. versus Rig Maiden, an Arizona court case that first brought the Stingray to widespread public attention. The ACLU had filed an amicus brief in the case alleging that the FBI sought authorization to use the Stingray. It concealed information about the device from the magistrate and that the use of the tool had violated the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. But again, the judge ruled the use of the Stingray to track down the suspect who was accused of fraud and identity theft did not constitute a severe intrusion and ultimately held that no Fourth Amendment violations occurred. So it is a absolute propaganda magazine used by the FBI. That's why it's located in New York and Washington, D.C., and that's why this little article was printed 4 days after Bryan Kohbeger's arrest, because they wanted to have the conversation that's been taking place in this case since day one to happen. And that is exactly why the investigators put that article in the footnote of that motion to unseal the IGG hearing. So at the very beginning of this thing, they were preemptively striking. But it's so obvious now what's taken place. You see, they truly believed, the confidential informant, that it was Kohbeger. They believed it to the point where they manipulated an IGG in reverse. You see, what happens when you do that is you can easily create a family tree from an ancestor down to a Bryan Kohbeger. And then you can easily manipulate the DNA to match Bryan Kohbeger. But the problem is, later on, when you find out that you were wrong in the first place, then you can dive into that family tree and realize that the tree that you put together hastily in a reverse manner actually had some discrepancies that you weren't aware of at first glance, that you would have been aware of if you had done it the proper way. And then when those discrepancies come to life, well, now you're in trouble, because now everything that you had planned to go a certain way in the case is going to go sideways, and you're going to look really bad. That's where we're at right now, folks. And I can't wait to release the next video. I'll have it out here in a couple of hours, where we dive into what is really going on with these hearings. We're going to go back to a recent hearing, recent one almost a year ago, and I'm going to show you in that hearing, as they talk about the IGG, I'm going to show you all the proof that you need, and then I'm going to show you how easy it is for Ann Taylor and their investigative team to annihilate the IGG in an open hearing in front of everybody in the world and change public opinion in a heartbeat on this case. And it's very easy. There's two ways they can do it. They're both very easy, and I'm going to show you. But in the meantime, please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Pavarotti's out.